this hour, I'm going to bring on a special guest, David DuByne, with new information about the collapse of the food supply in the southern hemisphere, which of course is moving into its springtime harvest or planting season right now. But we've got major breaking news from Europe today. But BASF, the chemical giant, has announced that it is cutting down its size in Europe, and it's moving its operations, or I should say expanding operations, in China. So we are looking at the deindustrialization of Europe. And when I had previous analyst Michael Yon on, he and I were having a discussion about this, and I asked him, what's the tipping point for the industrial collapse of Europe? And he said, if BASF shuts down, then it's over for Europe, because BASF, B-A-S-F, BASF produces, of course, the ammonia that's used for fertilizer production that grows the crops, in addition to just all the polymers and things that are turned into medicines and plastics and containers, and also chemicals for textiles and oil refining and manufacturing and so many other things. Folks, we're looking at the serious deindustrialization of Western Europe, and Europe as we know it is going to collapse over time into a third world country. And this has just been announced by BASF. It's been covered by Reuters. We're going to go into that in a little more detail. In addition to that, we have the German steel manufacturer, ArcelorMittal, has announced that it is about to shut down the two largest steel manufacturing plants in the world. And they are located in Germany, at least as I understand the story, as it's being reported. ArcelorMittal is shutting down because they can no longer compete, or they're about to shut down those plants because they can no longer compete in the international marketplace due to the high energy costs in Germany, which are an offshoot, of course, of the, Nord Stream pipelines being blown up by the United States, in addition to the economic sanctions against Russia that were also spearheaded by the United States. So the U.S., through this proxy state of Ukraine, has thrust Western Europe into a true collapse scenario. David DuByne will chime in about the mass famine, the starvation, the food scarcity and food inflation that is worsening in Europe at the same time that we're looking at an energy collapse this coming winter, where people will have to choose between heating their homes or feeding themselves. But it's not just Europe, folks. You might be thinking, well, what about the United States? Well, I just finished publishing a story today. Americans are skipping meals because of food inflation in the United States. And this came out of a survey from a group called Nationwide Retirement Institute. And it reveals that nearly a quarter of young people skipped meals or didn't buy groceries because of food inflation, which of course is a result of Joe Biden's policies, which we'll go into here in a minute. Let's see. 22% of millennials had to go to food banks in order to feed themselves. And 17% of people surveyed stopped buying healthier foods, such as organics or higher priced foods, because they can't afford them. And nearly 1 in 5 Americans say they're skipping meals or didn't buy groceries. And that number is 28% of Gen Z and 23% of millennials. So these Joe Biden policies, which include, by the way, the lockdown of food farms and food processing facilities during COVID, money printing that's devaluing the dollar. These are the points that I wrote earlier today. Government policies that pay farmers to destroy food. Canceling of natural gas pipelines resulting in higher prices of fertilizer and fertilizer scarcity in the United States, plus sharp increases in diesel fuel prices. These have all led to higher costs of food that's hitting not just, middle-aged people or older people, but younger people as well. So all of these factors are coalescing right now. Europe is looking very bad. The United States is getting worse, kind of trailing behind Europe in this catastrophe. Electricity prices in the United States are not nearly what they are in Europe, so that's at least, some saving grace in that process. But a company that, Mansfield is the company name that ships diesel, delivers diesel to 8,000 customers across the United States, has just issued a code red alert, a level 4 alert, and that's on the website, by the way. You can pull it up, mansfield.energy. They have a press release about that. It's affecting the southeast of the United States primarily, to the point where their diesel delivery trucks sometimes they go to hubs to fill up, and those hubs are empty, and the national supply of diesel fuel is now down to something like 23 or 24 days across the United States as a whole. So we're looking at scarcity of energy and food. It is coming exactly as we warned, exactly as we laid out many months ago. In fact, we were talking about this, I believe, in April and May of this year because of the result of the economic sanctions against Russia. So the bottom line, folks, is that you're going to face food scarcity that's real. You're going to face energy prices and energy scarcity that's absolutely real. Farmers cannot farm with the economics they used to be able to pursue in terms of agricultural production. Beef prices are going to skyrocket. All dairy prices are going to skyrocket. And in addition, as we'll hear from our guest coming up, David DuByne, the Mississippi River is so low that the barges are getting stuck in the river. And these are the barges that carry the grain. An enormous percentage of the grain produced in the United States moves up and down the Mississippi River basin on these barges because it's the most economical way to transport grain. Well, that grain goes into animals, ranch animals such as cattle. And if you don't have the grain because you don't have the water level in the river, then you're not going to have affordable meat products, dairy, whey protein, cheese, infant formula, and all of these products that come out of the meat or the cattle industry, they're going to go sky high in price while you have food rotting on the banks of the Mississippi River because there aren't enough barges that can move up and down the river to transport those items. The bombshell news that BASF has announced the permanent downsizing and shuttering of some of its European chemical operations. This story for the producers, this story is right now up on thegatewaypundit.com. And we're going to talk about food scarcity, starvation, and famine, and what that leads to in societies. Just for background, folks, you know, I'm a food scientist. This is my wheelhouse, food analysis and mass spec laboratories. I'm a published food scientist. And then David DuByne is just an incredible researcher, understanding the supply chain inputs and resource restrictions that affect the food supply. So David DuByne is, his channel is called Adapt 2030. His channel is on many different platforms, including still YouTube, which is quite remarkable. But David DuByne, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
You know, when we had this conversation about 6 months ago, so many things have manifested where you can see where things are actually in the trajectory right now. So it's getting a little bit easier to forecast because these marks in time of things to look for have actually transpired. Shutting down of fertilizer production across Europe, fertilizer shortages, crop price increases, supply chain bottlenecks are now becoming supply chain super glue. Yeah, you're going to have to make your own change in your own world. Nobody's going to do it for you. And if I could preface this, everybody is going to have to take action themselves. You can no longer wait for somebody to do it for you. You have to make these changes immediately for yourselves to survive through this time.
That's absolutely correct. And thank you for bringing that up. And I want to get your reaction to the big breaking news today. But first, just to mention to our audience, you and I did a longer duration, detailed interview yesterday. That's being edited now. That's going to be posted to band.video, I believe, no later than tomorrow. So, but David, BASF announcing the permanent downsizing of part of its facilities in Germany while expanding operations in China. You know as much as anyone how this is major. This is a milestone. This is a marker for history of the fall of Western Europe. Please explain, sir, how you think this is going to impact Western Europe and the food supply for decades to come.
To frame this on the BASF plant closure, and I was one of the things I wanted to talk about here as well, that plant after World War II was opened in 1952, and it has not shuttered even one day since that point. It has been open and it's expanded up to 10 square kilometers or 6 square miles, this facility. Now, because of the electrical shortages happening and the natural gas shortages, they were going to start turning off parts of this plant that had never been turned off since the 1950s. And one of their main concerns was when they tried to repressurize the system and actually get things flowing once again, that there would be continuous breaks, problems, explosions, fire hazards, and contamination hazards, gas hazards, all the way through when they tried to get the system repressurized up to functionality again, which we just turned off. So you can see that they understand in Germany that this is not possible to turn that plant back on again. So instead of explaining that to the general populace and saying, whoa, there's a lot of chemicals that aren't going to be here for farm inputs, that would send a scare through the populace of the world and maybe alert them that there are massive food shortages, and that would be the final straw that sent everybody running for supplies at the same time. But now, it's just a business article at this point. They're going to shutter operations and move over to China. Well, Free, you're right. This is the biggest thing here, that fertilizer production is permanently going down. Chemical production for farm inputs is permanently going down across Europe. So we're looking at what, 40% reduction in herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers coming up on a permanent basis.
To what you're saying, Bruder Mueller, who is the chief executive of BASF in Europe, he said that they are shutting this down, quote, as quickly as possible and also permanently. Permanently. This is the permanent deindustrialization of Europe that we've been talking about. And he cited not only the lack of natural gas, which is a key input, you actually have to use the hydrocarbon molecules from natural gas in order to make things like ammonia that go into all the other processes there. But also, he said, it's in part due to regulations of the EU. So the EU regulations have not only destroyed the infrastructure of fossil fuels, nuclear, coal, the things that keep an industrial society alive and running, but they're also, in effect, contributing to the shutdown of this massive chemical conglomerate that is necessary for the production of fertilizer and food and medicines and textiles and everything else. But I just want to add that in there, David, back to you, but as quickly as possible and also permanently. That is bombshell. That is shocking.
That is, and that's a self-inflicted wound as well. That never had to happen unless it's a plan to deindustrialize, and then that would just be the logical next step. So when we were talking 6 months ago about how this was going to transpire and the next lever would be turned off, the next gear, then where do we sit from today? The next thing to go down will be the supply chains to deliver all of it will suddenly be non-functional. Now, you can blame the Mississippi River, or you can blame Credit Suisse needing emergency 11, 12 billion. You can explain away and say that the derivatives market locked up and something happened there, but look for it. That's the next shoe to drop. So now the chemicals are being taken offline, fertilizers are being taken offline. So the next and only last thing in a logical basis looking out there is to absolutely lock up and destroy the supply chain so nothing moves. And then the task will be completed. But once that's completed, that's only part of it. Then what is next is the scary part to envision. After they have accomplished this goal of deindustrialization, then what?
Yeah, I mean, because you're going to see Western Europe plunge into a third world type of scenario very quickly, but the Europeans, by and large, they still don't realize that the United States inflicted this wound upon them, because until the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed by the U.S., which is, 100% certainty at this point, until that happened, there was always the possibility that Germany could restore the pipeline connection with Russia, that there could be diplomacy on the table. Well, even those 30 Democrats have backed away from diplomacy now. We can't have diplomacy, no peace, So now America inflicted this great wound upon Europe because there's no possibility of natural gas coming in. And this, I think, has factored into the BASF decision to shut down. BASF is saying, not only do we have no natural gas now, there's not even a possibility of having sufficient natural gas for many years to come. And even if it's restored, there's always going to be this conflict where the United States is bombing the infrastructure that BASF needs as a corporation in order to function. Yeah, I mean, it's like America declared war on Germany, in essence, at this point. What do you think?
And you look at how many LNG ships are offshore running $400,000 a day across Europe just to bring in what is needed for heating and keeping just the very base industry moving along in the coastal areas. The further you get offshore there, coming into, very deep into the heart of the continent, that will not be resupplied again. So there's how many ships really are there out there in the world that can continue to bring LNG in now that these pipes are gone?
And David, I'd like to invite you to go into the South America scenario that we talked about yesterday with water vapor and the cooling effect of the shorter growing seasons. Go ahead, give us all details of that.
We need to compare apples to apples here. So if you look at the Pinatubo eruption, I'm going to take you back into 1991 in the Philippines, Mount Pinatubo. Some of you were alive then, some of you were not. That ash cooled our planet 0.7 of a degree Celsius. And yes, there was some very minor effects on agriculture. There was decline in yields for those 2 years until the ash fell out of the air. It's usually a 2 to 3 year cycle. So enter Tonga in the beginning of the year here in January. The ash column actually went double the height into the atmosphere that Pinatubo had done. And when we look at recollections and stories of Mount Tambora in 1815, we're starting to look at very close similarities to what happened with Mount Tambora in the year without a summer. The subsequent 1 year after is really when a lot of problems globally with agriculture started to happen. Now, if you want to line that up in today's modern timeline, we have one of the biggest eruptions in 200 years. Food production is going to be cut anyway in the southern hemisphere greatly, and also northern hemisphere production affected. And suddenly we got all the chemicals cut off, all the fertilizers cut out. It's almost like the excuse will be there why food is about to fail across the planet as we move into the southern hemisphere planting season.
Talk about how much water was ejected into the stratosphere and the effects of the water vapor from the Tonga volcano earlier this year, because I think that's the key point here. Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead, make sure you cover that, please.
Yeah, thanks for keeping me on track there. I ramble sometimes. 52 miles is the height that the water vapor was ejected into the atmosphere. Now, the Tonga eruption was, as you see, it was in the ocean itself. So that also included sulfur dioxide, the ash, and this time the water vapor, which was a third element that was not in the Tambora eruption, which was a land-based volcano. So it was just sulfur dioxide and ash. This time, we had that water vapor going up 52 miles into the atmosphere. Now, this is already starting to be registered in terms of 4 degrees Celsius cooler temperatures, some places 5 degrees Celsius cooler temperatures in elevations where crops are being grown across South America, across South Africa, and you're seeing massive losses right over in Australia right now with a wheat crop. And, I directly think that these two are related because that water vapor, what's happening in Australia, record rains, unbelievable freezing, and they're about to get a polar blast that would wipe out anything that sits in the fields in terms of if it's not ready to harvest now, it's going to be lost to cold.
The water vapor, it stays in the atmosphere for a couple of years, and the water vapor, it doesn't just fall back down in a month. It stays in the atmosphere for years, it circulates around the world, and while it's there, it's reflecting sunlight. So it's preventing sunlight from reaching the surface of the earth, which warms, sunlight warms the crops and also provides photosynthesis. So because of that water vapor that's circulating in the air, that's why, as you explained yesterday, again, sorry to keep bringing you back to these points, but I want to make sure we really nail it down for the layperson who's not deep into this like you and I, David. We're kind of food geeks, but not everybody gets all the geekery like we do. But this is the important point. It's the crops are going to be, well, the soils are cooler, photosynthesis is reduced, and the crop season is therefore reduced because of that. So back to you again. Sorry to interrupt you. I've done it twice now. I'll try not to do it.
No, please do. Feel free. And for those out there to understand where this goes, there's something called watts per meter squared that's reduced. It's total solar irradiance, how much sunlight actually strikes the planet's surface. Now, if you take into consideration solar panels, they measure the exact same, how much watts per meter squared is striking the surface of an area. Will it have enough power there to, charge those solar panels? Yes or no? But each one that you decrease out of there really has an effect on agricultural production, which means that they're going to need to go to short season seeds or short crop seeds. And globally, there's just literally not enough just for the southern hemisphere. And then if it were to sweep back up here, which the crop losses we'll see next year in our northern hemisphere planting, if the world decides to go to short season seeds, there's just literally not enough. So the awareness of the food shortages inbound from the losses in the southern hemisphere is driving a lot of what we're seeing across the planet. So how much sunlight is going to be reduced will also increase mold and blight, and that's where we need the fungicides, which they won't be there because the fertilizers and the chemical inputs are all coming from the exact same factories. It's not like a fertilizer factory just produces fertilizer. They do chemicals. And without the herbicides, the fungicides in there, then all this blight and mold is going to wreak havoc with these wetter and cooler and cloudier conditions that we're about to see. Like the crop zones are set in a certain specific parameter for it to grow a certain crop. This much sunlight, that much wind, that much relative humidity. Well, this is all being thrown out right now as this light blocking event continues to amplify, and the rain's coming down now. Everywhere you look, it's record rain, out of season, 2 months of rain in a day, a year's worth of rain in a day, and these events are going to continue for the next year to two. And this is really going to have some massive effects on Southern Hemisphere production. Now, all of the Northern Hemisphere traders and companies involved in ag are all saying, well, let's see what happens in the Southern Hemisphere. Well, this is about what's happened in the Southern Hemisphere. So where does that put us on our world footing for food prices, food availability, food riots, and how governments are going to react to it all?
Yeah, it's what you're talking about that's hitting the Southern Hemisphere right now is going to be in the Northern Hemisphere, affecting the spring planting and summer harvesting next year in 2023. But what struck me about what you just said is, as this is reducing the amount of sunlight that reaches the crops, understand that globalists like Bill Gates are, in fact, involved in research called stratospheric aerosol injection. They are global dimming experiments. This is not an alternative view. This is mainstream news, okay? They want to eject a massive amount of pollution or particulate matter into the stratosphere in order to block the sun, because they claim the sun is bad. So you have these leftists and these globalists, they've declared war on sunlight. They think global warming is a problem. No, folks, it's global dimming because of the Tonga eruption and these other things that are taking place, including geoengineering. Global dimming is what's going to collapse the global food supply and turn things, turn every country into a famine scenario. That's the problem, not global warming. We don't have to worry about that. We have to worry about billions of people starving to death at this point. Back to you, David.
Well, that was always one of the worries with geoengineering was, okay, those particulates take about 3 years to slowly make their way out of the atmosphere. And what would happen during the interim if there was a volcanic eruption on the equivalent with Tonga or with Tambora that we saw in 1815? But their whole thing was, oh, that hasn't happened in 200 years, so it's such an outlier, it's not going to happen. But with decreasing solar activity on a 400-year grand solar minimum cycle, increased volcanism is one of the things that always accompanies this step down in solar activity on the 400-year cycle, not the 11-year cycle that we're used to. So then they had the mother of all disasters that everybody was praying would not happen. You have a massive VEI 6 or 7 eruption with all the particulates that are there from the geoengineering programs all intermingling. This is a runaway event that was foretold that it was a possibility of like 1 in 100 million chance, but it just hit. Where does that leave us now with our ability to grow food across the planet?
Well, an important factor in all of this is that even when you garden at home, your production yield is going to be somewhat lower for the very same reasons that we're talking about. So it's not just, look, I'm pro-gardening, and you do need to learn how to grow food, but you're going to have to maybe plant more than you otherwise would have planned for, because the growing seasons are going to be shorter in some areas, and yields are going to be lower because some amount of photosynthesis is being blocked. So David, just hold on to your thought there. We're going to go to a break right now. We'll come back with you on the other side to talk about 2023. What does it look like, and what are your predictions? Are we going to have price controls, food rationing, biometric ID to buy food? Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back with David DuByne. We're talking about global famine because of global dimming, the blocking of the sun with water vapor and other means. Don't forget, this last 2 days right now of the super sale happening at InfoWarsStore.com. Discount code 1776 helps you save up to 60%, not on everything, but on some things, Vitamin Fusion, DNA Force Plus, and other supplements. And I want to add a personal note to this and encourage you to think about what just happened. David DuByne and I were talking about BASF having a permanent reduction of operations in Europe. Do you know that in the supplements industry, because I'm in that industry, it is becoming very, very difficult to get the bottles, the caps, any kind of nozzles that go on top, like spray nozzles, pump nozzles, squeeze nozzles, anything like that, but just the lids and the bottles are already in short supply. For some of those, it's a 6-month wait time. to even get production of these plastics, usually polyethylene type of plastics that go into these supplement bottles. With the shutdown of BASF in Europe, I'm telling you folks, there's going to be a critical shortage of just the bottles and the lids that go into these supplements. Even if you can get the raw materials, it's going to be extremely difficult to get the containers. So that's another important reason to consider getting now what you might use over the next 6 months or 12 months. It's a very real thing, and even I have questions about how this industry is going to function if these supply shortages worsen. So, you just heard me describe the shortage of the plastics and the lids and everything in the supplements industry. That's something not a lot of people understand, but the same is true in farming and agriculture. And, the iron and steel that goes into farm equipment and the tines on cultivators for soil and things like that. Can you speak about those supply chain shortages in agriculture that you're seeing right now, David?
It's the same problems where the electricity prices were doubling, quadrupling, 10x, 15x. A lot of these steel refiners just shut the doors across Europe. Same with zinc and aluminum smelting and anything to do with copper. It's all stopped across Europe. So it's the perfect storm happening. And if you were to look at it in a way to collapse the global economy and bring everybody into a central bank digital currency or some sort of digital issuance programmable money, this has to continue until it runs into the ground at 100 miles an hour. Because I have a lot of questions how BASF is going to instantly just run over to China and set up and have the same output at the same volumes and still be able to have the same purchasers come in there. And I just don't see how that is going to work and how long this is going to take before we get back to some semblance of normal. Even if they set up 100% of production over in China, now all the rumors of war and the beating of drums of war between America and China, do you think they're really going to start sending those chemicals over to the United States with all this drums of war happening? I don't think so. We got Americans skipping meals. We got UK citizens skipping meals because it's too expensive now. They're not even heating some of their meals in the UK to save on electrical costs. This is the world we've gone into in developed nations like the UK and the United States are skipping meals and not heating their food because they're trying to save money. We've definitely entered a new period here where you realize you're on your own. You're going to have to take your own sovereignty for your food production, your food growing, your food preparation. You're all going to swing right back close to home again. You're going to have to stop relying on these centralized systems because they have broken down and they're not going to come back.
I don't think it's coming back online, frankly, for a lot of Western civilization. I think Western Europe will plunge into an agrarian, collapsed, impoverished society for a century. I mean, that's where I think this is going. Meanwhile, they can take plenty of hot showers in Russia or in China. Russia's producing steel. Russia's got iron ore. Russia has minerals, fertilizer, diesel fuel, oil, everything you can think of, aluminum. Russia's got it all. Western Europe has nothing. Nothing but lies and propaganda and financialization, like derivatives, instruments. It's so obvious, the collapse that's happening, but what I wanted to ask you, I mentioned this before the break, is what are going to be the impacts of this? What will governments do, aside from money printing? We already know they're going to do that. Here, have some fiat currency to buy groceries, which will just lead to more inflation. But aside from that, do you think it's going to come to a point of rationing or price controls or even a biometric identification every time you go to the grocery store so that they can track what you're buying and limit what you're buying? Are things about to go there?
They are for the digital rationing card. Because we're coming to a point really quickly here, and you probably get about a 2-month window before the realization of what's about to happen and is happening in real time in the Southern Hemisphere to reduce crop yields down there. And with the losses we just had up here, the USDA and the way that they're trying to average crops, there was so much variability in the crops this year that they've never had harvest variability at this levels before. So they're really having a difficult time how to even count and accrue the crops, because some field you'll have 200 bushels per acre, but directly across the road they're at a zero burn down. So there's no averages anymore. So even what we consider might be the yields are going to be lower than what's expected in the Northern Hemisphere. And then coupled with these massive losses inbound, the realization of famine, it will occur probably no later than Christmas time or right around the New Year time. And at that point, there's going to be a global rush for all countries and all people at the same time awaken and say, whoa, I need to get food for my family. I need to get medicines for my family. I need to get the tools. I need to get the grow lights. I need to get the 6mm poly so I can grow under cover in the winter. And there's going to be this mad rush for everything you need to put a garden in the ground. And there's just not going to be enough for everybody. At that point, the controls are going to come in. You're going to have to show your digital rationing card to be able to enter supermarkets. And this is the whole thing that pre-trained us. Stand outside in the cold 6 feet apart. Well, now it's going to be only 5 people in the store because there was looting, there was stealing. 10 people in the store, you're limited to 1 pound of butter, you're limited to this much milk, you're limited to this much. There probably won't even be meat unless you live in a farming community.
It won't be ground beef, it'll be ground crickets, and that's your allotted quota. 2 pounds of ground crickets a week. And also for your pet, dried grubs and things and worms and crickets and whatever else that makes your pets sick on top of that. So once they have control of the system, then they can limit not only what you're allowed to eat, but of course the quantity, so they can slowly starve everybody to death while claiming that they're giving people this food, that they're rescuing you because it's on a universal basic income in your central bank digital wallet. But it's really just an enslavement, genocidal system. And the only people that are going to survive this are people who have food and money outside the system. So food outside the system, or I call it off-grid food, is just what you said, David, gardening, home production. And yeah, there's going to be a mad rush for people wanting and needing to do that, especially in the spring of 2023 in the United States and Europe. But then you also have to have off-grid money, which is gold and silver, or perhaps certain types of crypto that may survive all of this as well, or other things that you can barter and trade, from ammunition to diesel fuel, iodine, you name it. Iodine's going to be worth, the minute the first dirty bomb goes off in Europe, you're going to see people on eBay selling iodine for $1,000 a bottle. Let me tell you. I know that because we saw that after Fukushima. So we know where that's going. You can buy it today for a few dollars, but I'm sorry, I've been going on, but your thoughts, David. We got about 2 minutes left here.
Yeah, it's going to follow that same trajectory for everything. Now turn it into a garden shovel. Oh, there's only 1 million garden shovels in America. China's not sending any more. So then maybe a new industry could arise out of taking, hoods of cars and pounding out shovels. But there's going to be that gap between massive anger, fistfights in stores to get those items that you're going to need. And eventually your preps are going to run out. So you really are going to have to go way beyond. Okay, the preps for now are great for the first 6 months or a year, but you're going to have to start thinking of how to refill those things without going to a store. So, that's about growing your food, getting the seeds, and being able to store that properly, and how to use natural medicines out of the forest and how to wild forage. And so many people have lost those skills on even how to make tinctures out of some of the most basic things, like the willow tree in the back. Scrape some bark, throw it in the alcohol, but people don't even know how to do that. It's such a lost, civilization of knowledge of what our parents, grandparents knew as just the basics to get through. All these people who lived through the Great Depression, we're going to go through something very similar, and this is going to knock on from the iodine to the shovels, and then it's going to be tumultuous at best if you're not prepared. And you're going to have to think longevity of outside the system, not just, working through with some storable pallets of food here for a couple months. It's going to be way longer than that. We're talking like a decade-long event here.